Sir, step back. I don't know who you are or why you're here.
This is my driveway. You're standing on my property.
I got a call saying you were a threat.
And you believed it, without asking who I am.
Keep your hands where I can see them.
They never left.
Major Marcus Thorne paused, his hands steady as he finished the cut through the treated cedar plank. The high-pitched whine of the DeWalt miter saw faded into the humid morning air, replaced by the aggressive baritone of a man standing at the edge of his driveway. Thorne didn't jump. He didn't flinch. In 25 years of service to the United States Army, he had been screamed at by drill sergeants briefed by four-star generals and shot at by insurgents in the Korangal Valley. A 20-something police officer with a high and tight haircut that looked 3 weeks out of regulation wasn't going to make him tremble. Thorne carefully lowered the safety guard on the saw, brushed the sawdust from his gloves, and turned slowly to face the intruder. "Can I help you, officer?" Thorne asked. His voice was a low rumble, the kind of voice that commanded briefing rooms without needing to shout. Officer Derek Vance stood with his boots planted wide on the concrete of the driveway, thumbs hooked into his tactical vest right hand, hovering dangerously close to his holstered Glock. At 29 years old, Vance carried himself with the unearned swagger of a man who believed the badge on his chest granted him dominion over every square inch of the city. He had been with the department for 5 years, a tenure marked by a trail of paperwork that would have ended the career of a lesser-protected civil servant. 7 complaints in 5 years, 3 for excessive force, 2 for verbal abuse, 1 for an unauthorized vehicle pursuit that ended in a wrecked cruiser. But Vance was active. He wrote tickets. He made arrests. His union representative called him proactive and assertive. His sergeant called him a liability waiting to happen. Today, that liability had parked his cruiser diagonally across Marcus Thorne's driveway, blocking the mailbox. "I said step away from the saw." Vance barked, his eyes scanning Thorne's frame. He saw a large black man, 6'2", broad shoulders, wearing a gray t-shirt stained with sweat and sawdust and cargo work pants. He didn't see the gray stubble on the chin. He didn't see the disciplined posture. He saw a suspect. He saw a threat. He saw someone who didn't look like they belonged in the Rolling Hills Estates, a neighborhood where the HOA fees cost more than Vance's monthly mortgage. "I am away from the saw," Thorne said, calmly removing his safety glasses. He folded them and placed them in his pocket. "Is there a problem? It's 10:30 on a Tuesday morning. I'm well within the city noise ordinance hours." "I'm not here to debate city code with you," Vance snapped, stepping onto the private property. "We got a call about a disturbance. Someone running industrial machinery causing a nuisance and acting aggressive toward residents." Thorne looked around his meticulously manicured front lawn. The hydrangeas were in full bloom. The American flag on his porch hung still in the windless air. The only sound for the last hour had been the intermittent buzz of his saw as he built a custom gazebo for his wife's 55th birthday. "There's no disturbance here, officer," Thorne said, keeping his hands visible resting loosely at his sides. "I'm building a gazebo in my backyard. I'm cutting the wood here to keep the dust off the patio. I own this home. I'm not bothering anyone." "That's for me to decide," Vance countered, closing the distance. The sun glinted off his sunglasses. He didn't like the tone. It was too calm, too confident. Suspects were supposed to be nervous. They were supposed to apologize. They were supposed to cower. This man was looking at him like he was a fresh recruit who had forgotten to shine his boots. It agitated Vance. It triggered that itch in the back of his brain that said dominance, established dominance. "I need to see some identification," Vance demanded, "and proof of residence. We've had reports of unlicensed contractors working in the area." "I'm not a contractor," Thorne said, his patience thinning but his discipline holding. "And I don't need to show you identification to stand on my own driveway. Unless you can articulate a crime I've committed, you're trespassing. You want to play lawyer?" Vance's hand dropped fully onto the grip of his service weapon, unsnapping the retention hood with a distinct click. I can make this a very bad day for you. Get your ID now. Major Marcus Thorne had led men into situations where the wrong decision meant death. He knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't dealing with a peace officer. He was dealing with a predator looking for a reason to bite. To understand how a decorated field-grade officer ended up facing a gun in his own driveway, you have to understand the man himself. Marcus Thorne was not a man of half measures. Born in Detroit to an auto worker and a school teacher, he had enlisted in the Army at 18, earned his commission through OCS, and spent the next 2.5 years climbing the ranks through sheer competence and grit. He was a logistician by trade, but a leader by nature. He had organized supply lines through the burning oil fields of Kuwait. He had managed forward operating bases in the mountains of Afghanistan, responsible for the lives and safety of 300 soldiers. He retired as a major, a rank that commanded universal respect in the military world. His pension was substantial, his investments prudent. When he and his wife Elena decided to settle down, they chose Rolling Hills for its peace. They wanted quiet. They wanted safety. Thorne was 58 years old. His knees ached when it rained, a souvenir from a jump at Fort Benning in '95. His hearing was slightly diminished in the left ear from artillery simulations, but his mind was sharp as a razor. He was a man of routines, up at 0500, coffee and news until 0600, gym at 0630, breakfast with Elena at 0800. By 900, he was usually working on a project. This gazebo was special. Elena had mentioned months ago that she wanted a place to read in the shade near her rose garden. Thorne had drawn the blueprints himself. He sourced the cedar from a specialist lumber yard 2 counties over. He wasn't just slapping wood together, he was crafting a structure that would stand for 50 years. He measured twice, cut once. That was the Thorne way. He had lived in Rolling Hills for 3 years. He knew the mail carrier's name, David. He waved to the couple walking their golden retrievers every evening. He kept his lawn pristine, his gutters clean, and his trash cans were brought in within an hour of pickup. He was the model resident. But to some, Marcus Thorne was invisible. To others, he was an anomaly. And to one specific neighbor, he was an irritation that needed to be surgically removed. Thorne knew who had called the police. He didn't need to ask the officer. He could see the blinds twitching in the house across the street and 3 doors down. The beige stucco McMansion with the manicured topiary that looked fake. That was the residence of Bryce Sterling. Thorne had met Sterling once at the neighborhood block party 2 years ago. Sterling had asked Thorne if he was the new landscaping manager for the HOA. When Thorne corrected him, explaining he had bought the Colonial on the corner, Sterling's face had done a complicated gymnastic routine of surprise, disappointment, and forced politeness. "Oh," Sterling had said. "Good for you. It's quite an investment." Since then, Thorne had received 4 letters from the HOA about minor infractions. A trash can left out 10 minutes too long, a flagpole that was supposedly 3 inches too tall, grass that was inconsistent with the neighborhood texture. Thorne had answered each letter with a polite cited reference to the bylaws proving he was in compliance. He had beaten Sterling at his own bureaucratic game, and he knew Sterling hated him for it. Today, Thorne was just building a gift for his wife. He wasn't loud, he wasn't messy, but he was visible. And for a man like Bryce Sterling, seeing a black man with power tools and confidence in his neighborhood was an offense that required state intervention. Bryce Sterling, at 34 years old, was the president of the Rolling Hills Homeowners Association, a title he wore with more pride than most men wear the Medal of Honor. He worked in tech sales, a vague job title that involved a lot of Zoom calls, buzzwords like synergy and vertical integration, and a salary that allowed him to buy a house that was slightly too expensive for his actual budget. Bryce was a man obsessed with control. He viewed the neighborhood not as a community of people, but as an extension of his own personal brand. He wanted uniformity. He wanted an aesthetic. He wanted Rolling Hills to look like the brochures for a gated community in a movie about perfect people. He didn't like Marcus Thorne. It wasn't something he would ever admit to out loud. He would tell you he had black friends he didn't. He would tell you he voted for progressive candidates he didn't. But deep down in the lizard brain that drove his decisions, he felt that Thorne didn't fit. Thorne was too big, too dark, too silent. That Tuesday morning, Bryce had been trying to conduct a client call when he heard the saw. It wasn't loud, barely a hum through his triple-paned windows, but it was there. He looked out the window and saw Thorne. He saw the sawdust. He saw the work truck, Thorne's personal Ford F-150, parked in the driveway. Bryce didn't check the time. He didn't check the bylaws. He felt annoyed, and in Bryce's world, his annoyance was a public emergency. He picked up his phone and dialed the non-emergency line, but then, feeling that wasn't urgent enough, he hung up and dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? Yes, I need an officer at 420 Oakwood Drive immediately. Bryce said, his voice pitching up into a breathless panic he didn't actually feel. There is a man. A transient or a squatter, I think. He's in the driveway of the empty house on the corner. He has industrial equipment. He's cutting things up. Is he threatening anyone, sir? The dispatcher asked. Bryce hesitated for a fraction of a second. The truth was no, but the truth wouldn't get a squad car there in 5 minutes. Yes, Bryce lied. He's screaming at people walking by. He looks unstable. He's got a saw and I think I saw a weapon in his waistband. I'm scared for my wife. Bryce wasn't married. He lived alone. We have officers en route, sir. Stay inside. Bryce hung up and smiled. He poured himself another cup of cold brew coffee and walked to the window to watch the show. He expected the police to come scare the guy off, maybe issue a citation. He wanted Thorne to feel small. He wanted to remind the major who really ran this neighborhood. He didn't know he had just lit a fuse that would blow up his entire life. He watched as Officer Vance's cruiser screeched to a halt. He watched Vance storm up the driveway. Good, Bryce whispered to the empty room. Get him. Back in the driveway, the air had grown heavy with potential violence. The birds had stopped singing. The gentle hum of the neighborhood was replaced by the static crackle of Officer Vance's radio. I'm going to ask you one more time, Vance said, his voice dropping to a gravelly threat. Produce identification, or I will place you under arrest for failure to identify and disorderly conduct. Disorderly conduct. Thorne repeated, his eyebrows raising slightly. I am standing still. I am speaking calmly. You are the one shouting, officer. You are the one with your hand on your weapon. You're refusing a lawful order. Vance stepped closer, invading Thorne's personal space. He could smell the cedar dust and the faint scent of Old Spice. He wanted Thorne to back up. He wanted him to flinch. Thorne didn't move a millimeter. He stood like a statue cast in iron. It is not a lawful order if there is no underlying crime, Thorne stated, reciting the law as if he were reading a field manual. However, I am not interested in a physical altercation with you. I will show you my identification to alleviate your confusion, but I am doing so under duress. Thorne moved his hand slowly toward his back pocket. Don't reach behind you, Vance screamed, drawing his taser with his left hand while his right hand stayed on his gun. Hands! Let me see your hands. Thorne froze. He slowly lifted his hands, palms open to chest height. My wallet is in my back right pocket. You asked for ID. I am getting my ID. Slowly, Vance breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was terrified, though he would never admit it. He was terrified because Thorne wasn't terrified. 2 fingers. Pull it out. Thorne used 2 fingers to fish out his leather wallet. He opened it and pulled out a card. It wasn't a driver's license. It was a blue card with a chip, a Department of Defense Uniformed Services identification and privilege card. It identified him as a retired officer, grade 04. He held it out. Retired Major Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army. Vance snatched the card from Thorne's hand. He looked at it. He had never served. He had never bothered to learn about federal credentials. To him, the card looked odd. The formatting was different from a standard driver's license. The photo was a bit older. Vance's bias kicked in, overriding any logic. A black man in a millionaire's neighborhood doing manual labor, handing him a card he didn't recognize. It had to be a fake. A sovereign citizen ID, a printout from the internet. "What is this?" Vance scoffed, flicking the card with his thumb. "I asked for a driver's license. This looks like something you printed at Kinko's." "That is a federal military identification card," Thorne said, his voice hardening. "It is valid government ID. If you look at the back—" "I don't care what it says on the back," Vance interrupted. "It's fake. You're passing forged documents to a police officer. That's a felony." "Officer," Thorne said, and for the first time there was a warning edge in his voice, the kind a commanding officer uses right before a court-martial begins. "You are making a mistake that you cannot undo. Look at the hologram. Run the number. Do not do this." "Turn around," Vance shouted, holstering the taser and grabbing his handcuffs. "You're under arrest for forgery, obstruction of justice, and resisting arrest." "I am not resisting," Thorne said loudly, looking past Vance to the sidewalk where Mrs. Higgins, his 70-year-old neighbor, was standing with her phone raised. "Mrs. Higgins, please record this. I am complying." "I said turn around." Vance didn't wait for compliance. He grabbed Thorne's left arm and twisted it behind his back with enough force to dislocate a shoulder on a smaller man. Thorne, trained in hand-to-hand combat, had to actively suppress the muscle memory to counter-throw the officer. He knew that if he fought back even in self-defense, he would be shot. The narrative would be, officer involved, shooting suspect struggled. He would be just another dead black man on the news. So he let Vance twist his arm. He let Vance shove him forward against the hood of the hot police cruiser. "Spread 'em." Vance kicked Thorne's ankles apart. He pulled Thorne's other arm back and ratcheted the handcuffs on. Click, click, click. He squeezed them tight, deliberately tight. The metal bit into the soft tissue of Thorne's wrists, pinching the nerves. Thorne didn't make a sound. He stared at the reflection of the sky in the cruiser's windshield. "You're hurting him," Mrs. Higgins yelled from the sidewalk. "That's Marcus. He lives here. He's a veteran." "Back up, lady, or you're next," Vance yelled over his shoulder, sweat dripping down his forehead. He felt a surge of adrenaline. He had the suspect. He had won. He patted Thorne down roughly, pulling the wallet, the keys, and a folding pocket knife from his pants. He threw them on the hood of the car. "Fake ID weapon, trespassing," Vance muttered, building his case out loud. "You're done, pal." "The card is real," Thorne said, his cheek pressed against the hot metal of the car hood. "And my name is Major Thorne. You will address me as such." "You're a prisoner, not a major," Vance spat. He grabbed Thorne by the back of the neck and hauled him upright. "Get in the car." As Vance shoved Thorne into the cramped back seat of the cruiser, another vehicle pulled up. It wasn't a patrol car. It was a black SUV with Police Supervisor stenciled on the side. Sergeant Frank Kowalski stepped out. Kowalski was 55, a Marine Corps veteran of the First Gulf War, and a man who had been trying to get Derek Vance fired for 2 years. He had heard the radio chatter Vance's escalated tone, the lack of clear probable cause, and he had driven over immediately. Kowalski saw the scene. He saw the suspect in the back of the car. He saw the neighbors recording. He walked up to Vance, who was puffing his chest out. "Report," Kowalski said, his voice flat. "Suspect was operating loud machinery," Vance said, quickly, breathless. "Refused to identify. Belligerent. Then he handed me a fake ID. Tried to pass himself off as military. I detained him for forgery and obstruction." Kowalski looked at the hood of the cruiser where the evidence lay. He saw the wallet. He picked up the blue card. He froze. He knew this card. He had a green one in his own wallet, retired reserve. But this one was blue. Retired regular Army. He looked at the rank. Major. Major. Kowalski looked at the photo. Then he looked through the window of the cruiser at the man sitting in the back. The man was sitting upright despite the handcuffs. He was staring straight ahead. He had the 1,000-yard stare of a man who had seen things Derek Vance couldn't imagine in his nightmares. Kowalski felt a cold pit open in his stomach. "Vance," Kowalski whispered. "Did you run this ID?" "No, Sarge, it's obviously fake. Look at the font. It's—" "Shut up," Kowalski snapped. "Shut your mouth right now." Kowalski opened the back door of the cruiser. He leaned in. "Major," Kowalski said, using the title instinctively. "I'm Sergeant Kowalski, USM C90 to 94. I need to verify something." Thorne turned his head slowly. "Semper Fi, Sergeant. If you check my back pocket, you'll find my driver's license behind my CAC card. But your officer didn't let me get that far." Kowalski closed the door gently. He turned to Vance. Vance was starting to look confused. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the dawning realization that he had missed something. "Vance," Kowalski said, his voice dangerously low. "Give me the keys to the cuffs." "Sarge, he's a suspect. We have to process—" "Give me the keys." Vance handed them over his hand, shaking slightly. Kowalski walked to the back door, opened it, and helped Thorne out. He spun Thorne around and unlocked the cuffs. He didn't just unlock them, he checked the wrists. Deep red indentations circled Thorne's skin. The circulation had been cut off. "I apologize, sir," Kowalski said, standing at attention. "There has been a severe misunderstanding." Thorne rubbed his wrists. He didn't smile. He didn't yell. He looked at Vance, who was standing by the hood of the car, looking small and pale. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Sergeant," Thorne said. "It was a targeted assault. That officer refused to verify my credentials. He refused to listen to reason. He escalated a noise complaint into a felony arrest because he didn't like the way I looked." "I thought it was fake," Vance blurted out. "He didn't have a license." "You didn't ask for a license," Mrs. Higgins shouted from the sidewalk. "He tried to show you. You pulled a gun on him." Kowalski turned to Vance. "You drew your weapon for a noise complaint." He reached for his pocket. "I told him I was reaching for my ID," Thorne corrected. "I announced my movements. I followed the rules of engagement better than your officer did." Kowalski took a deep breath. He knew what this was. This was the end. The end of Vance. Maybe the end of the chief. "Major, you are free to go," Kowalski said. "I'm going to take this officer back to the station. We will be conducting a full internal investigation." Thorne picked up his wallet and keys from the hood. He put his sunglasses back on. "Internal investigation isn't enough, Sergeant," Thorne said. "I'm calling the Judge Advocate General's office. I'm calling my lawyer, and I'm calling the press. You tell your chief that Major Thorne sends his regards." Thorne turned and walked back up his driveway. He didn't look back. He walked to his saw, picked up a piece of sandpaper, and went back to work. The fallout was nuclear. The video Mrs. Higgins took hit Twitter X 2 hours later. It was titled, "Hero Veteran Arrested in His Own Driveway." By the time the evening news aired, it had 4 million views. The image of Officer Vance twisting the arm of a 58-year-old black man screaming, "Stop resisting," at a man who was standing perfectly still was played on CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC. The internet detectives went to work. They found Vance's prior complaints. They found his high school yearbook photos. But the real damage happened in the legal system. Thorne didn't hire a strip mall lawyer. He hired a firm that specialized in high-profile civil rights cases. The lawsuit filed 3 weeks later was a masterpiece of legal destruction. It named Derek Vance the police chief of the city and Bryce Sterling. Yes, Bryce. Thorne's lawyers subpoenaed the 911 call. They played it for the world to hear. Bryce's voice trembling with fake fear, claiming Thorne had a weapon, claiming he was a squatter. It was a false police report. It was swatting. Officer Derek Vance was placed on administrative leave the same day. He was fired 3 weeks later after the internal affairs investigation led by a furious Sergeant Kowalski concluded that Vance had violated 18 separate department policies, including unlawful arrest, excessive use of force, and failure to verify identification. The qualified immunity defense crumbled because Vance had violated clearly established constitutional rights. Vance tried to appeal. The union tried to save him, but the video was too damning. The visual of the fake ID being a legitimate military credential was too embarrassing. The Department of Defense even issued a statement condemning the treatment of a retired officer. Vance's certification was revoked. He would never be a police officer again. At 29, his career was over. He ended up moving back in with his parents in Ohio, working security at a warehouse where he wasn't allowed to carry a gun. Bryce Sterling didn't escape either. He was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor that carried a heavy social price. His company, seeing the PR nightmare, fired him for violating the code of conduct. He was forced to sell his house in Rolling Hills to pay his legal fees. He moved to a condo in the city where he had no yard, no view, and no HOA to preside over. The city settled with Major Thorne for $6 million. They didn't want to go to trial. They knew a jury would give him double that. 6 months later, the gazebo was finished. It was beautiful. Cedar posts, a shingled roof, intricate lattice work. Inside, there were comfortable chairs and a small table. It was a Sunday afternoon. The neighborhood was quiet. Major Marcus Thorne sat in the gazebo, a glass of iced tea in his hand. His wife Elena sat opposite him reading a book. The physical scars on his wrists had faded to thin white lines, but they were still there. The mental scars, the memory of being helpless, of being treated like an animal in front of his home, those would take longer to fade. Thorne looked out at the street. A police cruiser drove by slowly. It wasn't Vance. It was a new officer, a young woman. She slowed down as she passed the house. She looked at Thorne. She didn't glare. She didn't stop. She gave a small, respectful nod. Thorne didn't nod back. He just watched. He had won the battle. He had removed the threat. He had secured his perimeter. But the war for the right to simply exist without explanation, without justification, without fear, that war was still ongoing. He took a sip of his tea. The cedar smelled fresh and clean. "It's perfect, Marcus," Elena said, looking up from her book. "It is," Thorne replied softly. "It's ours." The silence of the afternoon was heavy, not with tension, but with the weight of a hard-fought peace. It was a reminder that freedom is not a guarantee written on paper. It is a territory that must be defended sometimes with a rifle in a foreign land, and sometimes with quiet dignity in your own front yard. What do you think about the consequences for the neighbor who made the false call? Should people who weaponize the police face jail time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe these stories need to be told, hit that subscribe button to support the channel.